If you feel unmotivated lately, not lazy, just empty, this is not a failure of will. It may be a sign that your psyche is no longer willing to move in a direction that has lost meaning. Most people believe motivation disappears because something is wrong with them, a lack of discipline, a loss of ambition, burnout. But Carl Jung believed something very different. He believed motivation disappears when the psyche is preparing for change. Psychic energy does not vanish randomly. It moves with purpose. When a role, goal, or identity no longer serves your deeper self, the unconscious begins to withdraw energy from it. This feels like apathy, exhaustion, or loss of drive. You try to push forward, but something resists. You try to force motivation, but it doesn't return. This is not laziness. It is misalignment. Your psyche is saying, this direction is no longer alive. Jung warned that when people ignore the signal, they often fall into depression or compulsive distraction, not because they're broken, but because they're living a life that no longer contains meaning. Motivation is fueled by meaning. When meaning fades, energy follows. This is why rest does not restore motivation, why productivity tips stop working, why willpower feels useless. Because the problem is not effort, it is truth. Your inner world is asking a deeper question. Why am I doing this at all? One of the most confusing things about losing motivation is that it looks exactly like burnout. You feel tired, disengaged, uninspired, so you assume something is wrong. But Jung made a crucial distinction that most modern psychology overlooks. Burnout is exhaustion of energy. Awakening is a withdrawal of meaning. They feel similar, but they are not the same. Burnout comes from doing too much of what still matters. Awakening comes from doing what no longer does. This is why your exhaustion feels strange. You may not be overworked. You may not be overwhelmed. You may even have time, rest, and comfort, yet the drive is gone. That absence is not random. According to Carl Jung, the psyche is economical. It does not waste energy. When motivation disappears, it is because the unconscious has stopped investing in a direction that lacks inner truth. This is why forcing yourself forward feels heavy. You are trying to animate something that has already lost its soul. During spiritual awakening, the psyche begins to question the why behind your life. Goals that once provided structure begin to feel empty. Ambitions that once gave you identity begin to feel borrowed. You may still want the outcome, the recognition, the security, but you no longer feel alive pursuing it. This is a split. The ego wants continuity. The self wants authenticity. Jung believed awakening begins when these two come into conflict. The ego says, keep going. This is who you are. The unconscious responds, this is no longer enough. So energy withdraws. Motivation fades not to punish you, but to stop you from continuing unconsciously. This is why motivation does not return with encouragement, why advice feels hollow, why productivity hacks fail. Because awakening is not a problem of discipline. It is a problem of meaning. You are no longer willing to live on borrowed purpose. This phase often feels like standing in fog. You know you cannot go back, but you cannot yet see forward. This uncertainty creates anxiety. People around you may not understand. They may call you ungrateful, lazy, or lost. But Jung warned that periods of psychological rebirth always resemble collapse from the outside. The old identity dissolves before the new one is visible. This is why awakening feels destabilizing. You are no longer driven by fear, approval, or expectation, but you have not yet discovered what will replace them. So motivation pauses, not as an ending, but as a threshold, a space where the psyche asks you to stop running and start listening. What is emerging cannot be forced. It must be heard. When motivation disappears, it is often because something deeper is breaking apart, not externally, but internally. According to Carl Jung, the psyche is built around adaptation. From an early age, we learn what brings approval, safety, and belonging. Over time, these adaptations harden into goals. We pursue success because it brings recognition. We chase stability because it brings safety. We adopt identities because they help us survive. But survival goals are not the same as soul goals. For a long time, they align, and then they don't. Shadow work begins precisely at this moment. The shadow is not just anger, fear, or dark impulses. It is also unlived truth, dreams you abandoned, values you compromised, desires you silenced because they didn't fit the life you built. As long as your goals align with your persona, the version of yourself you show the world, motivation flows. But when the persona drifts too far from the self, the shadow intervenes. It does not ask politely. It disrupts. You begin to feel resistance toward things you once chased relentlessly. Achievements feel hollow. Milestones feel strangely anticlimactic. You may reach what you wanted and feel nothing. This emptiness is not ingratitude. It is a psyche refusing to celebrate something that cost too much of your truth. Jung believed the shadow emerges to correct imbalance. When too much energy is invested in maintaining an image, success, or expectation, the unconscious pushes back. Motivation collapses because the goal itself collapses, not outwardly, but inwardly. This is why you may feel conflicted. Part of you still wants the old life. Another part feels repelled by it. This tension creates paralysis. You hesitate. You procrastinate. You drift, not because you lack discipline, but because two inner forces are pulling in opposite directions. The ego wants continuation. The shadow demands honesty. Shadow work is not about destroying ambition. It is about stripping ambition of false meaning. You are being asked to look at your goals and ask, did I choose this or did I inherit it? Does this nourish me or only define me? Am I moving towards something or away from fear? These questions are uncomfortable because they threaten identity. If a goal collapses, the self built around it must also dissolve. This is why shadow work feels destabilizing. You are not just losing motivation. You are losing a version of yourself. But this loss is necessary. Jung warned that clinging to outdated goals leads to neurosis, the psyche trapped between who it is and who it pretends to be. The disappearance of motivation is the psyche's final refusal to continue that lie. You're being asked to descend, to sit with uncertainty, to tolerate not knowing, to let false goals die without immediately replacing them. This is the hardest part, because the mind wants answers, but the soul wants truth, and truth does not rush. This phase can feel like standing in ruins, but ruins are not emptiness. They are space. Space where something more honest can eventually grow. After false goals collapse, something unsettling follows. Nothing rushes in to replace them. This is the phase most people fear the most. You are no longer motivated by what once drove you, but you are not yet inspired by anything new. The result feels like emptiness. According to Carl Jung, this stage is unavoidable in psychological transformation. He referred to it as a liminal state, a space between identities where the old has died, but the new has not yet formed. The psyche does this intentionally. If something new appeared too quickly, it would only be another escape, another borrowed structure to avoid truth. So the unconscious creates a pause, a void. In this void, productivity feels pointless. Goals feel artificial. Distractions lose their appeal. You may feel restless, bored, or strangely detached from life itself. This is not depression. Depression collapses energy entirely. The void holds energy, but refuses to spend it. The psyche is conserving itself. Jung believed this phase forces a confrontation with meaning stripped of reward. When motivation is no longer bribed by validation, money, approval, or fear, one question remains. What moves me when nothing is expected in return? Most people never reach this question. They rush to fill the silence. They grab new goals, new identities, new distractions. But if you are here, something in you refuses to settle for substitutes. You feel it. Anything forced feels wrong. Anything artificial feels draining. So you wait, not passively, but honestly. This waiting is not emptiness. It is incubation. The psyche is clearing space for something that cannot be manufactured. Meaning that emerges from this void does not feel exciting at first. It feels true. But before that truth can surface, the psyche must strip away everything that depended on external reward. This is why this phase feels uncomfortable. You are learning to exist without borrowed momentum, without borrowed purpose, without borrowed identity. And that is terrifying because it leaves you alone with yourself. But Jung warned that avoiding this phase guarantees stagnation. Those who cannot tolerate the void return to old goals they no longer believe in and slowly numb themselves. Those who stay change, not visibly at first, but permanently. After the void, something subtle begins to stir. Not excitement, not ambition, but direction. According to Carl Jung, the psyche does not replace lost motivation with force. It restores movement only when alignment begins to return. This is why the shift is almost imperceptible at first. You do not wake up inspired. You do not suddenly feel driven. Instead, you begin to notice resistance fading. Certain thoughts no longer feel heavy. Certain ideas no longer feel false. Certain actions no longer drain you completely. This is how the psyche signals readiness. Direction returns not as urgency, but as permission. You feel allowed to explore without committing, allowed to move slowly, allowed to act without needing certainty. This is unfamiliar. Your old motivation may have been fueled by pressure, deadlines, fear, comparison, expectation. This new orientation is quieter. It asks, does this feel honest? Does this feel clean? Not. Will this impress? Will this secure my future? Jung believed that when the ego stops demanding outcomes, the self begins to guide movement. This guidance is not dramatic. It appears as small inclinations. Curiosity returns, briefly. Interest flickers, softly. Energy moves cautiously. You may feel tempted to rush this, to turn it into a plan, a system, a new identity. But the psyche resists being captured too quickly. This direction must be trusted, not forced. You begin to understand something important. Motivation is no longer meant to push you. It is meant to follow meaning. You are learning to move from alignment, not toward reward. This is why progress feels slower, but more grounded. You are not chasing a future version of yourself anymore. You are listening to who you already are. And that kind of direction cannot be hurried. After the void, something subtle begins to stir. Not excitement, not ambition, but direction. According to Carl Jung, the psyche does not replace lost motivation with force. It restores movement only when alignment begins to return. This is why the shift is almost imperceptible at first. You do not wake up inspired. You do not suddenly feel driven. Instead, you begin to notice resistance fading. Certain thoughts no longer feel heavy. Certain ideas no longer feel false. Certain actions no longer drain you completely. This is how the psyche signals readiness. Direction returns not as urgency, but as permission. You feel allowed to explore without committing, allowed to move slowly, allowed to act without needing certainty. This is unfamiliar. Your old motivation may have been fueled by pressure, deadlines, fear, comparison, expectation. This new orientation is quieter. It asks, does this feel honest? Does this feel clean? Not. Will this impress? Will this secure my future? Jung believed that when the ego stops demanding outcomes, the self begins to guide movement. This guidance is not dramatic. It appears as small inclinations. Curiosity returns, briefly. Interest flickers, softly. Energy moves, cautiously. You may feel tempted to rush this, to turn it into a plan, a system, a new identity. But the psyche resists being captured too quickly. This direction must be trusted, not forced. You begin to understand something important. Motivation is no longer meant to push you. It is meant to follow meaning. You are learning to move from alignment, not toward reward. This is why progress feels slower, but more grounded. You are not chasing a future version of yourself anymore. You are listening to who you already are. And that kind of direction cannot be hurried. Eventually, everything begins to settle, not into certainty, but into coherence. You understand now why motivation disappeared. It was not taken from you. It was released. Released because it was tied to fear, pressure, and identities you had outgrown. According to Jungian psychology, this is what integration looks like. The psyche no longer fractures itself to meet expectations. It gathers itself around what feels true. You no longer need constant drive to move forward. You no longer rely on urgency to feel alive. Your energy returns differently. Quieter, steadier, more yours. You begin to trust your inner signals. You stop forcing momentum. You stop chasing versions of yourself that never felt real. Purpose no longer feels like a destination. It feels like alignment. You act when something calls you. You rest when it doesn't. You move without abandoning yourself. This is not the end of ambition. It is the end of false ambition. You are no longer motivated by who you think you should be. You are guided by who you are becoming. And that guidance does not exhaust you. It sustains you. You realize something essential. Nothing was wrong with you. Your tiredness was intelligence. Your loss of motivation was wisdom. It was your psyche asking for truth instead of pressure. Now, life feels quieter, but more meaningful. Slower, but more honest. Simpler, but more alive. This is not a collapse. It is a return. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care of what is truly yours.